Okay, so we now come into the New Testament overview. In this first session of the New Testament section, we'll look first at the years that span the Old and the New Testaments, what many people call the silent years. There were no prophetic voices for approximately 400 years. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot happening and that God wasn't at work in the world. And so we first look at some of the occurrences during this period which helped set the stage for what we find in the New Testament. So it ends, that period, the Old Testament period essentially ends with the prophet Malachi's prophetic pronouncements. We then find 400 years where no written prophet is speaking, and then John the Baptist is raised up by God to declare the Messiah. During this time, great changes took place right across the earth. The Persian Empire was raised up, followed by the Greek Empire, and then the Romans. And of course, when we come into the New Testament, we find that the Romans are very much in charge. There's also some great stories of the Maccabean revolt against the Romans, and we've got some interesting information about that that's well worth a look. It was also during this time that religious aspects in the Jewish nation changed quite dramatically with the rise of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And so you'll find in your notes a little bit of information about how that came about, just so you're aware of where these different characters and different groupings kind of sprung up from that seem to suddenly appear in the New Testament narrative. We all know the New Testament is such a powerful biography of the Lord, and that the letters and the other information that God has packed into it is full of his own life and his own power. So of course, over this period, we'll be looking first at the Gospels and then at the letters, and really digging in to find out some of the treasures that are hidden therein. You know, in your notes in the introduction to this section, we also look at the chronology of the New Testament writings, when they were written, who they were written to, and some basic outlines as to the groupings of letters. Like we have 9 church epistles, 9 Hebrew epistles, 4 epistles that were written to individuals. And then, of course, the historic foundation upon which everything stands, the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. You know, and in these in this session, we're looking particularly at those Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 3 synoptic Gospels, which relate historically and very much from different viewpoints. We get a different view of Christ's ministry from each of the 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then we have John, which kind of stands unique as a gospel that looks more at the private interactions of Jesus than even at the public ones. Each one has something powerful to reveal about the nature and the character of the Lord Jesus. We really, like Mark, for example, looks at very much at what Jesus did, whereas Matthew and Luke tend to emphasize what Jesus said. John, on the other hand, looks very much at who Jesus was. Each of the Gospels was also aimed at a different audience, which can explain a lot about the differences that we find in them. You know, the book of Mark was written largely to a Roman audience or a Roman mindset, whereas Matthew was written to the Jews largely, and so it contains much information that would be of specific interest to the Jewish mind. Luke, on the other hand, was addressed to a cultured Gentile audience and stresses Jesus' concern for all kinds of people, including the poor, women, and foreigners. And then, of course, John tells of Christ's sacrifice for the whole world and his eternal and universal position and mission, a gospel written to the world and for the world. And so what you'll find in this section will really just lay a framework and a foundation for your understanding of the Gospels, that you'll come and you'll look at them in a fresh light. And then, of course, we have the full graphic timeline, if you like, or the insights to the Gospels. In this graphic section of the New Testament overview, we look at the Gospels in detail and gather together the signs, the wonders, the miracles, with references to where they take place in the Gospels. We look at all the different sections, the parables of Jesus. We look at the events of the last week of his life, the crucifixion, the resurrection. So the graphic overview really goes from the birth and the infancy of Jesus right through his ministry, and then documents where you can find the various different things within the Gospels. It really will be an invaluable tool to help you find your way around the Gospels, and such a beautiful reference for the future. So I encourage you just to sit down, take some time, open the notes, let the background information of the pre-New Testament period, and then of course the information about the writers and the purposes of those who wrote the Gospels, really just get into your heart. And then as you do that, then begin to read the Gospels, take the notes that we've got, the graphic overview, and begin to look up some of those references. Come with a fresh eye and a fresh heart, full of expectation that God will speak to you about the living Christ who dwells within you today, and of his ministry that operates today in our generation, in and through his people. God bless you. Enjoy the notes.